Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Makes me feel nervous.
Another hurdle for farmers, what the chilly temperatures mean for BC's berry season.
It means we're going to be able to pivot our businesses in a much more profitable direction.
And while fruit producers face challenges, some hope for ranchers. Plus, the call for more support for people with long COVID and why some say it's complicated.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. Record-breaking low temperatures in southwest BC are taking a toll on local farms and food production. Crops are weeks behind schedule because of the exceptionally cold and wet spring. And as John Hernandez reports, it's yet another big hurdle for farmers who have already had a challenging year.
By now, we would be seeing quite a bit more growth.
The strawberry plants at Sajjan Mandare's Abbotsford farm aren't flowering like they should be at this time of year, and there's not much he can do about it.
Makes me feel nervous. Yeah, it definitely makes me feel nervous.
Strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries all weeks behind amid repeat days of cold, cloud, and rain.
The cold weather has really stunted the growth of all the plants, and it's really kind of slowed down the season for us. It's also made it very difficult to get into the fields.
Over the past few weeks, parts of BC have experienced low temperatures not seen in decades as a La Nina cools much of Western Canada. For farmers across the region, it's meant a frustrating start to the spring season after a year like no other.
We just can't seem to catch a break. I mean, it's been steady with heat domes and floods and fires, and now it's too cold, and it is significantly too cold. It's about 2 degrees below average. And that's enough to put us back about 3 weeks in most crops.
Mandare says the crop lag will thrust him into greater competition with international producers whose yield will likely make it to market first.
There's other countries that come in and they're able to take that market share, right? And we want to supply that. All of us farmers want to supply the market chain.
The volatile weather seen over the past year, a sign that growers will need to adapt to a changing climate.
We need to put more effort into securing some of our food supply by growing it indoors.
Something that's already happening at this farm, but it takes time and money.
What I'm really wanting to do is trying to figure out how can we cut these variables out? How can we control the environment a little bit more and work that way, because the population's growing and we need to produce food.
A time of uncertainty and rising costs, which is why those growing the food say it's more important than ever to buy local. John Hernandez, CBC News, Abbotsford.
Yeah, Joe, I was just talking to my dad about this yesterday. He's also a berry farmer. The season is late, so I'm sure he and others want to know, is anything going to change?
That's the big question, Anita, and it really does look like we have more overall cold weather, at least for the next couple of weeks. We will see some temperatures rise up into the high teens, but La Nina looks to stick around through the summer, and most of our long-range forecasts look to keep things cool for the next couple of weeks, but it really has been one extreme to another. Let me show you one of the extremes that we're watching this week. We have yet to hit 17 degrees in YVR, and that really is sort of a picture of what most of the South Coast is experiencing. Look at the other records that we might have to push past. May 16th, the latest they hit 17 degrees was 1961. May 20th, 2011 was the latest they hit 17 degrees then. And this year, we might not hit 17 degrees until this Friday. So that would tie for first place for latest ever on record hit 17 degrees. So yes, it is anomalous. And as we move forward, something we've been talking a lot about in a warming climate, these kinds of years will be the anomaly, but extremes will continue to grow in intensity and frequency. Look at the current temperatures right now, 14, a little warmer than where we were at this weekend. Speaking of the weekend, how about that rain last night? That was actually the 9th wettest May day ever on record. Wow, we just got record after record here, not necessarily in a good way. This round of cold and chilly weather, thanks to this low sitting off our coast, and it's actually going to usher in a big storm that I want to talk a lot about throughout the show, coming in for Wednesday. So it's just approaching on the satellite. We actually get a dry day tomorrow for the most part, but special weather statements already in place for the South Coast, Anita. I'll break it down later on in the show. This could be a big impact event, again, for Wednesday, and I'll be honing in on it a little bit later on.
All right, Joe, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And from berries to meat, it's also been a tough year for ranchers in the Nicola Valley between wildfires and catastrophic flooding. But now there is a ray of light. Brady Strachan is looking into plans to build an abattoir in the area and how it's opening up avenues for meat producers to market their products.
All right, love.
Julia Smith has just returned from helping a neighbor drive cattle out to ranch land. Smith moved to the Merritt area 6 years ago in hopes of expanding her pasture-raised hog farm, but she found few options to slaughter the animals locally.
When we got here and started to scale up, only to realize that the local processors couldn't keep up with our business plan. And so instead of growing our business, we actually had to scale back.
It's an issue for many rural meat producers who want to sell directly to consumers. Smith says abattoirs are hours away in larger centers and don't have the capacity to take in livestock year-round. So she teamed up with other farmers to start an association of small-scale meat producers. And last week, they secured provincial funding to build a local abattoir.
This couldn't have come at a better time for producers in the area. It means we're going to be able to pivot our businesses in a much more profitable direction and to be able to supply meat to our community at a time when people are starting to take that sort of thing really seriously.
Smith says the abattoir is great news for ranchers who have struggled with fires and floods over the past year. And she says it's good for consumers as well.
People really want to know the story behind their food. And with technology today, it's easier than ever. You know, I'm up here on the range taking pictures and sending those to Instagram, and so people can really see what goes into the meat that they eat.
Further north in the Robson Valley, butcher Mark Roth is also working on a solution to the problem. Roth is building a mobile abattoir, a trailer he can take directly to farms so he can butcher and process the animals on site.
Our goal is to bring meat inspection to the farmer so that the farmer doesn't have to transport their animals to their nearest abattoir. In our case here, it's 2 hours away, and you've got to bring the animals up, and they're not used to being on trailers.
He says it's all about giving meat producers more options for marketing their livestock, which is good for the industry and also consumers. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Merritt.
The official leader of the opposition, Kevin Falcon, was sworn in at the BC legislature today. Falcon was elected to replace former BC Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson after Wilkinson stepped down. Today, Falcon questioned the BC government's spending priorities, zeroing in on the recently announced plan to spend $789 million on a new Royal BC Museum.
People need help now. And yet the priority of this premier is a $40,000 pay raise for himself, a huge raise for all the cabinet ministers, which is totally undeserved, and more than $1 billion on a new museum in his own backyard.
Falcon suggests the BC government should focus on helping people deal with affordability and gas prices. The BC government is trying to encourage cities and towns to reduce carbon emissions by giving them funding. The new program helps cities support climate action projects. Officials say the program will triple the overall amount available to local governments, with each receiving a base of roughly $38,000 a year.
This program will provide local governments, regional districts, and 8 modern treaty nations predictable funding that can be directed to local priority projects. It will also help communities that want to adapt or prepare for climate impacts.
The new program is part of the province's Clean BC roadmap to meet 2030 reduction targets. The breakdown of how much each city is getting will be announced in August. Alberta company Atco is apologizing for an ad that used the destroyed town of Lytton as its backdrop. The upbeat ad featured 2 children pulling a tree through the burnt landscape, arriving at a newly reconstructed school and helped by Atco employees in planting a tree. The school, however, does not exist. In its apology, Atco says they are truly sorry for the pain the ad caused residents and that to date it has donated $130,000 to the community. The company has not, however, taken the ad down, and it continues to be played on television. Well, 59 cats and kittens, along with 1 sheep, have been rescued from a property in Surrey's Cloverdale neighborhood. The SPCA says the animals had been left alone on the property, and the conditions in the home were very unsanitary, including large amounts of feces piled throughout the house, urine-soiled carpets, piles of garbage, and flies. The cats were extremely thirsty and are suffering from a number of medical issues. They are now in the care of the SPCA. A fatal 4-car collision shut down Granville Street for several hours this morning. Around 6 a.m., a Toyota Corolla traveling north on Granville Street near 46th Avenue crossed onto oncoming traffic. The car hit multiple vehicles and injured 2 other drivers. Police believe the Corolla was speeding when it sideswiped a taxi and hit a Porsche before going airborne over a truck and landing on top of a Hyundai Elantra. The driver of the Corolla died at the scene.
We don't know all of the details yet. It's still in the early stages of the investigation, so we don't know exactly what caused it, but we do believe speed was a factor.
The VPD's Collision Investigation Unit wants to speak with anyone who saw the vehicle before the crash, and anyone with dashcam footage on Granville Street between West 50th and West 46th Avenue is asked to contact police. Well, Vancouver's Tenants Unit is sounding the alarm, saying the city's Broadway subway project could spark a slew of so-called dem-evictions. The union says its research shows landlords stand to increase their rental income by 10 to 20% once the project is complete, incentivizing them to evict long-standing tenants in favor of new ones after doing some renovations. The concern comes on the heels of a new plan to build high-rises along the corridor, which could see as many as 50,000 more residents added to that stretch.
To give you an example, a 1-bedroom, if someone was evicted from these current places, they can expect to pay over $800 more for a 1-bedroom if they had to pay a market rate.
Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart had said about a quarter of the city's renters currently live in the Broadway corridor. An independent group of healthcare professionals is criticizing the BC government on the lack of care for long COVID patients. As Leanne Young tells us, they say the government needs to start by acknowledging COVID damages more than just your lungs.
The group Protect Our Province BC says the government needs to stop giving the impression COVID-19 is just a respiratory illness.
That's okay for March 2020 and April 2020. It's not okay now when we know that there's so much more long-term effects of it, that acute care is, like I said, is only one part of that.
Bakshi says COVID doesn't always end when fevers and coughs subside. She's seen patients struggle for months with issues like fatigue, brain fog, and the loss of smell or taste. The group says there needs to be more emphasis on long COVID support.
And very little is talked about at the briefing as to, well, what happens in between.
Part of the problem, they say, is we don't know how many British Columbians have long COVID, but other experts say collecting that data might be a challenge.
Maybe this person has something else in parallel, and they say, oh, it's COVID, but it's not COVID, it might be another virus, because some viruses that cause similar symptoms. So it's very hard to collect data from people that have not been like, let's say, more moderate or severe long term.
Add to that, we don't know who actually has COVID. With PCR testing nearly halted in the province, some people have turned to private clinics like this one to help treat symptoms.
A lot of individuals are unable to get into the long COVID clinics that do exist. There's limited capacity, and a lot of them aren't truly addressing the underlying cognitive issues that people are struggling with.
5 post-COVID clinics staffed with nurses, physiotherapists, and social workers are open on the South Coast. The health minister says that's just part of the solution.
Because it's never just going to be clinics. You're going to have a network of providers everywhere in the province who knows what to do, just as we do with diabetes and other prevalent chronic diseases.
For these doctors, they say then more funding is needed.
If you don't want to open a bunch of long COVID clinics, at least fund enough that gives you the idea of what the model should look like so that it is then replicable.
If not, they say it's just more work for overburdened family doctors. Leanne Young, CBC News, Vancouver.
A Surrey-based photographer is shocked after finding out he can't take pictures at one city park without a permit. The document is now required at Elgin Heritage Park, and as Kiran Singh explains, there's concern more parks will be added to the system.
Elgin Heritage Park is home to popular photography spot, the Stewart Farmhouse. Now, anyone who wants to take pictures there will have to apply for a free photography permit. Surrey-based wedding photographer Paul Riyad is worried about the impact.
To make our business a little bit tougher and prevent us the freedom of adjusting based on weather, based on last-minute shoots, it just adds another restriction that we don't need.
The city of Surrey declined to speak to CBC News about the change, but in a statement says the city decided to implement permit program due to complaints. Over the last number of years, numerous complaints regarding wedding groups and commercial photographers have been received from public users of the historic Stewart Farm at Elgin Heritage Park. Riyad has been going to this park to take photos for past 10 years. He says he hasn't had any issues with other photographers or wedding parties. On the contrary,
the only problems I have actually experienced has been from the staff that works in the house itself. Once I had a client driving out and I had a camera off to the side here. As they were driving away, pulling out, I was trying to take a photo of them. A staff member comes running out, literally stood in front of the car waving her hands, saying, "No photos here."
And Riyad says the permit process will be unfair to some community members.
The net effect essentially appears that it is primarily affecting Sikh weddings, South Asian weddings, right? Because they all are the ones that mainly use this park on a weekend. They're the ones that have larger groups.
The permit only has certain time slots available. As many South Asian wedding ceremonies happen before noon, most are looking to take photos in a limited time slot between noon and 3 p.m. before the reception.
I'd say about 90% of photographers here, or at least 90% of the photographers here on a weekend, are South Asian.
The city says the program is not targeted at any communities. In fact, the city is planning on expanding this program to other parks. Up next is Glades Woodland Garden in the fall. Kiran Singh, CBC News, Surrey.
What kind of school has a graveyard?
It's been nearly a year since the discovery of hundreds of potential mass graves in Kamloops. Now, a new CBC podcast takes you to another infamous residential school known as the Canadian Alcatraz. We journey to Cooper Island with Duncan McHugh next. Thanks so much for watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. Well, if you've been eager to get back on the commuter train between Vancouver and Seattle, you'll need to wait even longer. The Amtrak service was canceled in March of 2020, and plans for a restart have been pushed back. Anita Bathe tells us why.
The journey on the Amtrak Cascades train service won't happen anytime soon. Amtrak officials say travelers will need to wait until at least December, blaming the delay on a staffing shortage. The company says it doesn't have enough conductors, mechanics, or onboard staff to run the service, and some travelers are feeling let down, saying they're missing the train experience.
I love Canada, and now it's like, oh no. I could drive, but there's something magical about taking the train.
It is very disappointing. I like to visit Vancouver often. I haven't been able to do it since the lockdown.
More than 159,000 people rode the train between Seattle and Vancouver every year before the pandemic. The labor shortage is happening despite a hefty $66 billion investment in Amtrak to ramp up service in new cities and catch up on maintenance. And that's all under President Joe Biden's Infrastructure Act. The delay is concerning for some transportation unions.
It's not acceptable. Amtrak just is not geared up quick enough to hire the staff they need to return that level of service and to fill the attrition that they've experienced.
Amtrak says it's hiring more employees, but it's a matter of having them complete training. It's hoping to get service back up earlier than scheduled. In the meantime, bus service is available between Vancouver and Seattle. Anita Bathe, CBC News, Vancouver.
new CBC podcast is exploring the haunting legacy of a residential school in BC's southern Gulf Islands. The 8-part series, Cooper Island, which debuted today, follows investigative journalist Duncan McHugh as he attempts to understand what happened in the place known as Canada's Alcatraz. Take a look.
They called it a school. But what kind of school has a graveyard? The place I'm talking about is the Cooper Island Indian Residential School. It shut down in 1975, and the community of Penelakut wasted no time tearing it to the ground. But years later, when they started to examine the old school grounds, they discovered something else, something hidden and never meant to be found. I'm Duncan McHugh, and over the years I've reported a lot of stories about residential schools. I'd heard horrible things about the Cooper Island School. It operated for nearly a century on an isolated island off the coast of British Columbia, run by Catholics, funded by the Canadian government. This place was so notorious, it came to be known as Canada's Alcatraz. Who died? How did they die? Where are they buried? And why have their graves gone unmarked for so long? Those are questions neither the government nor the church has ever properly addressed. And now, I'm looking for answers.
It's like a Stephen King book. It's like a bedroom that will never go away.
I have never seen such abject fear as what I saw in that child. And I have never seen such abject evil as what was in that man.
Psychopaths and sociopaths raise children in a confined space. And that has everything to do with why children are missing and murdered.
Clandestine burials are clandestine for a reason. People who do the burying don't want anybody else to know about them.
Cooper Island, available now, wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
And CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burrett spoke with Duncan McHugh about Cooper Island. Here's that conversation.
Duncan, why focus on Cooper Island?
Dan, your viewers will remember last summer when after the announcement at Tecumloops about unmarked graves, it just seemed like there was one announcement after another. Residential schools right across the country were announcing that they had the same issue, graves in at former sites, and it was almost hard to keep track. There were so many. I observed, because I've been reporting in BC for nearly 20 years, when Penelakut made the announcement of unmarked graves in their community, that caught my eye, because I had heard horrible things about the Cooper Island School over my years of reporting on the residential schools, and this is a school that survivors call Alcatraz. I mean, it's a place where in the first 30 years of its existence, nearly 40% of the children died. It's a school that had a graveyard. It's a place that students were running away from, which, there are lots of runaways that were running away from every residential school across the country. But of course, Cooper Island is an island in the Salish Sea, yet kids were still trying to get away from the place and in some cases dying.
Now, in particular, you focus on 3 children who managed to survive Cooper Island. Can you tell us more about them?
One of the things that we were very careful about, producers Jody Martinson, Martha Troyan, and I, was that we didn't want to cause any unnecessary harm to survivors. And so we approached the Penelakut Elders Committee to explain that we were doing a podcast, that we were going to be visiting the community regularly and asking difficult questions. And Tony and James Charlie were 2 of the survivors of the Elders Committee who really wanted to share their story. They walked me around the old school grounds, and they were open about sharing their history and wanted Canadians to know what they'd been through, even though that those were difficult stories. In walking around with James and Tony, we began to hear stories about a young boy named Richard Thomas who had died in a most tragic and and mysterious way, really, Dan. I mean, the survivors have been talking about the way that he died for years now, whispering about it, and that led us to his sister, Richard's sister, Belvie Breber, and those three survivors are key to this podcast, and also finding out about the boy who died, Richard Thomas, and hopefully giving people more than just about the tragic and awful way that he died, but telling them a little bit about who he was as a boy and as a person.
And Duncan, what do you want and hope listeners take away from this podcast?
I think, you know, last summer was a shock to a lot of Canadians, and it hurt for a lot of Indigenous people. It brought up all of that trauma. Penelakut has been through this. They've been at the GPR work for 8 years now. It's been a painful process, but they have lessons, I think, for other communities that are embarking on this work. And so I hope that listeners will take that away. But also, I really hope that listeners just understand the courage of the survivors to speak up, the courage of non-Indigenous people who spoke up and said, this system was wrong. And I hope that listeners it will help them when they start to realize that this wasn't just a dark chapter in Canada's history, it is the whole story when it comes to relations with Indigenous people.
Duncan McHugh, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Prince Charles and his wife Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, will begin a whirlwind three-day tour of Canada tomorrow. The royal couple is touching down first in St. John's before heading to Ottawa and Yellowknife. As Thomas Dagler reports, the visit is part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations to mark her 70 years on the throne.
With the cannons atop Signal Hill still bearing the initials of the monarch and the Union Jack fluttering in the Newfoundland wind, this British-tinged corner of Canada will play host to Prince Charles and Camilla as they kick off a 3-day national tour.
Yeah, I think people are excited.
Among those welcoming the royal couple, this century-old non-profit knitting group. With a royal visit comes plenty of attention, and St. John's will bask in the spotlight.
One of the gifts that we will be presenting tomorrow is a replica of the sweater that was made to present to the Queen at the birth of Prince Charles.
Police and royal tour planners are mapping out security measures and every step along the way, from the Lieutenant Governor's residence to the old Kitty Vitty fishing village. Charles will visit after a recent poll suggested only a third of Canadians approve of the country remaining a constitutional monarchy with him as king.
If Prince Charles and Camilla are coming here now to reinforce Canadians' opinion of the monarchy, I think it's a mistake.
The royal couple will walk through this heart garden and pause for a moment of reflection and prayer. It's dedicated to the victims of residential schools, and this is one stop on a tour meant to highlight reconciliation efforts. Just last year, the horrors of residential schools prompted protesters in Winnipeg to topple a statue of Charles's ancestor, Queen Victoria. In the Northwest Territories, as in Newfoundland, Charles will meet with Indigenous leaders, including Todd Russell of the Nunatukavut Community Council in Labrador.
There's been a lot of wrong done in the name of the Crown, and there's a lot of good that needs to happen.
More than 500 years after Henry VII sent men to these shores, the future king will seek to address wrongs of the past. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, St. John's.
And despite Prince Charles and Camilla's plans to acknowledge the legacy of colonialism in this country, Olivia Stefanovic tells us it may not be enough.
When the royals meet Indigenous peoples in Yellowknife, this residential school survivor hopes they come prepared to listen.
Through reconciliation, they can right the wrongs.
The visit by Prince Charles and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, is seen as a chance to showcase the resilience of Indigenous communities, many of which signed treaties with the Crown, who broke its promises to evenly split resources and offer protection.
Yes, an apology would be good, but I think it is much more important that we see the kind of action that is needed to move relationships forward.
Others want the royals to learn about the very culture residential schools tried to destroy.
They should also apologize sincerely for the loss of our very Indigenous being.
While the Queen is still here with us, I think that should come from her.
The Métis National Council president says any royal apology needs to come from the top of the family, along with financial compensation.
We need, basic human necessities in our communities, and that comes from, it stems from colonization.
But the former chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says the monarchy has had limited power over government policies since Confederation.
I'm not a big fan on holding the royal family to account for what its government does.
Still, with the Queen being the head of state and Anglican Church, some say a recognition of the harm caused by the institutions it ran is necessary.
There's got to be the acknowledgement, then the apology.
So it may be a different royal welcome from those of the past, with demands for them to say sorry amid the usual pomp and circumstance. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
A growing sense of grief and anger in Buffalo today, while many are saying simply not enough was done to stop a man racially targeting and killing Black people. That's next.
Here's the film now, Bob. We have a group of climbers just reaching the top of a snow slope.
Well, are they just starting now?
Well, they have been on the way some time, and they're just approaching a rock cliff. The leader's going to take his rope and pass it down to the other climbers. Here you see him taking the rope out of the pack. He will undo it, and each climber will tie himself into the rope. The leader now has the rope, and you see him untying it. This is strictly for precautionary measures. It's to make sure that if anyone falls, that they will be held securely by the rest of the party.
Well, are every member of the party tied with the rope?
Yes, every member of the party is tied with the rope, and usually there are not more than 4 members on one rope. There's probably 20 to 25 feet of rope between each person.
Well, here they're starting to tie them.
Yes, they're tying in now. The leader is tying the rope around his stomach.
Well, what kind of a knot is that?
That's a bowline, Bob.
Is that the only type that is tied?
That is the type that is used.
Well, what about the man in the middle? He doesn't have any end.
Well, he uses a different type of knot. He uses a butterfly knot. And then the man on the end uses a knot similar to this one. He wants to make sure that it's not going to tighten around his middle and almost choke him in the center.
Well, here they're going to start now.
Yes, the leader's looking back to see his party's ready, and he's starting up the first pitch. He will go as far as he can and be in a safe position, and then he will stop, and the next man will move up to where he is located. Now he's going to stop there, and the next man is going to catch up to him. He's taking in the rope, taking in the slack, so that if the man should fall, that he could hold him.
Well, here comes our second man. Now, what happens to the third man? What does he do?
He moves up to where the second man was.
So it's just a continuous operation?
That's right. One moves at a time.
Well, Mr. Willis, what happens when you run into ice?
Well, Bob, if it's glare ice, we use crampons. Here's a crampon on a boot. They're long spikes attached by a thong to the boot, and they grip the ice where the nails wouldn't hold.
Well, what else is used besides the crampon?
Well, we may use the axe, of course, to cut steps and then move along in these steps, but it's much slower than using crampons.
Well, in case of you haven't got crampons, can the axe take their place?
In most cases, but not always.
Well, what safety precautions are taken by the mountaineer clubs?
Well, Bob, we should not go out into the mountains with less than 4 people. You should have, in case of accident, there would be one person to look after the injured party, and the other 2 could go for help. You should take sufficient clothing, extra food, and of course a light. And above all, tell people where you're going and when you expect to be back.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Willis. Thanks for coming down and telling us something about mountaineering. And now, on to our next item.
A community is grieving the victims of yet another mass shooting in the U.S. A white teen is accused of driving more than 300 kilometers across New York State to Buffalo and fatally shooting 10 black people on Saturday. And the 18-year-old suspect in custody has been charged with murder but has not pleaded guilty. As Stephen D'Souza reports, federal prosecutors are also contemplating hate crime charges.
My mother was an angel. My mother was, she was my mother. You know, you can't replace your mother.
The pain is still raw for Garnell Whitfield. His mother, Ruth, was the oldest victim in Saturday's shooting. She had just left a nearby nursing home, where for the last 8 years, she used to visit her ailing husband. He was the love of her life, but Whitfield says they haven't figured out how to tell his father she's gone.
We don't know what's in his best interest, how he will take this news.
Many here are focusing their anger on the suspect, who specifically targeted this neighborhood and its predominantly black residents.
That's evil. And for a kid that young that had that much evil in his heart, I really feel like, you know, he really, we need to do better.
All 10 victims have been identified, including 72-year-old Kat Massey, who last year wrote to the local paper calling for action to address gun violence, and 67-year-old Hayward Patterson, a deacon who often shuttled people to and from the store to get their groceries. The store is at the heart of this community. The only grocery store in the area, it was a hub, which makes the shooting that much more devastating.
He studied that it was an important hub, but there's more like him. There's more like him across these United States of America.
Civil rights lawyer Ben Crump called for accountability for those online and on TV that promote the ideology that allegedly motivated the gunman.
What happened on Saturday was an act of domestic terrorism. And we have to define it as such.
Garnell and his family fought back tears to lead a call for change.
What are you willing to do so that the next time it's not you standing here before your broken-hearted family?
He took away my mother and my best friend. How dare you? How dare you?
Police today released a chilling new detail. Had the accused gunman not been caught on Saturday, he had plans to continue to other locations nearby. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Buffalo.
Investigators believe the shooter's path to extremism was paved in part by a racist conspiracy theory, one that's popular with white supremacists online. But as Mukta Gebrselassie explains, experts worry it's a fringe theory that's becoming increasingly mainstream.
The search for answers and calls for action are getting louder.
How many more lives have to be taken before something is done?
Police say the shooter was radicalized online, driven to hate by the so-called Great Replacement theory, the idea that white people are being replaced by people of color. It's been tied to other mass shootings, including 2019's in Christchurch, New Zealand.
There's a sense of community online that eggs them on, and they use what they learn online to go on to the physical world and kill people.
It moved from more fringe communities online to more mainstream.
Those who've studied replacement theory say it's been seen in Europe, India, and the U.S.
This idea that certain groups are replacing other groups are being quite popularized with far-reaching implications for minorities.
And it's casually seeped into mainstream media, too. Here's how Tucker Carlson talked about it on Fox News.
The Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world.
For many people, the solution has to be systemic.
We intend to hold those responsible for the root of the hate, the people who curate the hate, the people who inspire the hate on websites and internet services and cable news stations.
As for gun control, so many mass shootings have resulted in no real change.
I think the focus ought to be on trying to be preventive rather than to restrict legal buying from people.
Tomorrow, President Joe Biden will visit the grieving community. He will offer presidential support, if not a solution, for this very American problem. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Washington.
To Ukraine now, where forces in the country's northeast say they have pushed Russian troops back toward the border. But even with the most of the fighting now concentrated in the eastern Donbass region, few Ukrainians are safe from Russian shelling. As Briar Stewart tells us, many feel the signs of victory are very distant.
Russian soldiers didn't storm the center of Kharkiv, but their missiles did, destroying City Hall, killing at least 30. But it's in the northeast where entire blocks have been leveled. 82-year-old Larissa Alexandrovna gets help patching her shattered windows. It's scary, she says, when you see and hear all this. Every day, you're afraid of the trembling. But the blasts aren't as frequent or as close as they were before. Ukraine has pushed the Russians back further north. One territorial defense unit claims it took this video right at the Russian border. But Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, was one of Russia's earliest targets. Over the past 2.5 months, the city and the villages around Kharkiv have come under attack. There's no clear estimate of how many have been killed, but the number is in the hundreds. But there are many more victims suffering from physical and emotional scars. This man was on his way to get water from a well when there was an explosion. His leg was nearly blown off. It hurts to remember completely, he says. Down the hallway, this woman born during the Second World War is now suffering through another. They simply destroyed us. Why? What is the reason for this war? Hard to comprehend, particularly for children who've been living underground for weeks. Dozens are staying in the Soviet-era bunker. Some have lost their homes, others their family. Valentina Trechina's son committed suicide just days after the invasion began. I believe that everyone should be brought to justice for these deaths, she says. Life down here feels bleak, but for some, safer. The Russian military may be further away, but this city is traumatized and remains on edge. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Kharkiv.
Well, they say it takes a village to raise a child, but what does it take to raise a baby gibbon? Meet Milo next. And at 6:43, a live look tonight at the Salish Sea from Parksville. A mixed bag of weather on the south coast, including a bit of sun, but there's yet more rain to come and plenty of it. Johanna has all the details next. I want to take you to New Brunswick now, where a zoo is keeping a close eye on a newborn baby gibbon. The 3-month-old doesn't really need a hand. Between mom, dad, and a 2-year-old sibling, there are enough limbs to attend to the recent addition in the family. Have a look at the ways baby Milo is learning the ropes.
We have a family of 4 white-handed gibbons at the zoo. We have a mother and father, Rudy and Canuck, 2.5-year-old baby Lek is his name, and actually an almost 3-month-old baby. They're an endangered species from southeastern Asia, and they are known for howling very loud, a territorial call that they do. And a locomotion, a form of locomotion that they do to move through the forest canopy, and it's called brachiation, where they have their very long arms and they're actually swinging from branch to branch, and they can actually come up to like speeds of 50 kilometers an hour in the wild, and they've been seen jumping 40 to 50 feet in one swoop. The baby is typically, it's just starting now, he's just starting now to come off of the mother a little bit. But he has a way that he holds on to the mother, and she holds her legs in a certain way that almost makes a little seat for him to kind of protect him. And he's very strong, so he holds on quite tight, and it's not uncommon to see her swinging around in her enclosure, and the baby is fine holding on. And I think everybody who comes here and watches them really enjoys them, and that's really all we're asking, is for people to come to the zoo and create a connection with one of the species or many of the species here. And it's very important for an animal like the gibbons, like I mentioned, they're endangered. So if you can have that connection with a species here at the zoo and go home and find some sort of conservation action that you can do to make a difference for their lives, especially for animals that are endangered, that's huge for us. And that's all we're really asking, is for people to come to the zoo, enjoy that, and do that.
Okay, it was hard to see the baby there clutching on to his mom, but that 2.5-year-old gibbon, I mean, I think we both know, acting like a toddler.
I was just going to say, yeah, our toddlers have a lot in common with a 3-month-old gibbon, with the swinging and the somersaulting, but at least ours don't howl exactly like that, right?
Well,
I know. There are some days, but yeah, so cute. Okay. Wing into the long weekend forecast. I was pretty proud of that one. We've got a lot of temperature swings coming up in the next few days. Let me start you off with what's going on across the country, because if you were like me and had any friends or family in Toronto, at Ottawa, and Montreal, you saw them all out shorts with the pools and the patios. Their heat wave that they had this summer coming down in temperature, 14 right now, and we're watching for thunderstorms in the east. 13 in through Vancouver, 19 for Kelowna. Seen a little warm up in Alberta. I just wanted to take you over to India for the current temperatures. Sunday, the India Meteorological Agency reporting an all-time new high in northwestern Delhi. We saw 49.2 degrees being reported there, and officials are asking people to stay indoors. Some good news, although as you look at these temperatures right now, these are the morning lows. Things are coming down in temperature over the next couple of days, finally getting a bit of a break. We're watching a big storm for tomorrow. I want to time it out for you. Special weather statements in place. These will likely get upgraded to wind warnings for sure. Rain warnings also possible, and mountain snowpass also all in the cards. We could be looking at hurricane force winds for part of the island. So we've got this cold low sitting off our coast. It's going to direct in a low for tomorrow night. Watch as it makes landfall on the north coast, and really, if that changes location even by a few kilometers south, then we're going to see those strongest winds also move farther south. Also notice the snow that's piling up for both mountain ranges. We will see more accumulating snow, so a bit of a break tomorrow before we see that system move in. It is going to be a very stormy Wednesday for the south coast. Could be a high impact event as far as power outages go, and look at those cold temperatures as well. So enjoy tomorrow before we see that storm on Wednesday. Anita, a couple nice days though after that, and keeping an eye on Sunday for the long weekend weather.
All right, thanks, Joe. Looking forward to that hopeful long weekend weather.
Me too. That 18 looks good.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Oh man, it is so good to be home.
After a long pandemic break, the return of the Junos, rolling out the red carpet in style. We take a look back at the night that was next.
This gas station has no lineups at its pumps, no wait times at the cashier counter, it has no snacks or drinks, and no one checking their pull tabs or lotto numbers. In fact, this mobile gas station has no frills at all. It just has fuel. And that's all some people want.
Oh, but they're sick and tired of going to the gas station, and the sign on the back of the truck says we bring the gas station to you and we will go right to your door and service your needs.
Citco Fuels paid about $500,000 for 2 mobile gas station trucks. Pace spent around a year doing research before he bought the vehicles. He phoned around to car dealerships and asked some of his own clients if they'd be interested.
So we said, what else can we provide to our customers? So we thought it would be a good idea to bring in the gasoline. And I'm glad we did. The response has been amazing.
Amazing translates to more than 200 customers using the service, even though the trucks have only been on the road for less than 2 weeks. The Colborne Ford dealership was the first company to sign up for gas delivery. This kind of service is a big help to them. It means workers don't have to drive dozens of cars off the lot just to get gassed up, so they can spend more time doing other work.
Time equates to money, and it equates to better customer service. So that's why we're all here. We want to serve our customers in a way as efficiently as we can. And the great thing about the program is that it helps businesses save their time.
But it's not just companies who like these gas trucks. People are using the service to get their cars fueled up at home rather than going out to the gas station. Pace says it's all about convenience.
Instead of lining up at the gas station, we'll be able to service those people quicker right off the truck.
Pace says that the new service just makes life a little easier for people. And that's what's attracting so many people to it. Amy McNeil, CBC News, Sydney.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
May is Asian Heritage Month, and we're celebrating by sharing the stories of amazing Asian Canadians who are making meaningful contributions in the community. Visit cbc.ca/BC Community to learn more. And never miss an episode of your favorite CBC drama or comedy again with the free CBC Gem app. Check it out at gem.cbc.ca.
Well, there's lots to celebrate in Canadian music at the 51st Juno Awards, and it was all the more special because it was finally back in person since COVID restrictions were introduced. The CBC's Eli Glasner was on the red carpet and has the night's most memorable moments.
It's
been 3 years since fans and musicians got together to celebrate the best in Canadian music, but last night in Toronto, the Junos returned in grand style.
Oh man, it is so good to be home.
Hosted by homegrown music fan and Marvel superhero Simu Liu, the show was packed with memorable moments, like the return of the pop-punk princess herself, Avril Lavigne.
She was the first person who beat to her own drum and gave me the confidence as a songwriter and as a little artist to be able to say what I wanted to say. So, Avril, we love you!
Also enjoying love from fans, Charlotte Cardin, who won 4 Junos, including Album of the Year.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, this is so incredibly special to me.
Another fave, Shawn Mendes, came home to accept the International Achievement Award and had a message for fans.
I'm not standing here to tell you to give up on your dreams. I'm just here to tell you that while you are chasing them, don't forget to enjoy the process and remember, you're already enough.
Be the best, better on your block. In between the awards, performances covering just about every part of the musical spectrum. DJ Shub and the Snotty Nose Rez Kids joined forces for the Indigenous hip-hop track, War Club. The first black woman to be inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, Deborah Cox, wowed the crowd with Nobody Supposed to Be Here. While Mustafa channeled pain into poetry with Stay Alive. And from TikTok to the Juno stage, Tesher performed his viral hit, Jalebi Baby, with a little help from the host himself. Eli Glassmer, CBC News, Toronto.
Awesome stuff. Jalebi Baby, an awesome song if you haven't heard it. Okay, surprise, you're seeing us on TV tonight. For the last couple of weeks, we've been online only because of hockey playoffs, and that will continue on and off for the next little while. So if you are looking for us, we actually are online Monday to Friday at 6 p.m. You can find us on CBC Gem, Facebook, and YouTube. And that is it for our show tonight. Thanks so much for being with us. We do have a bit of a special show tomorrow, but I won't give it away, so you will have to watch to find out. Good night.